After writing 2 transformational books myself and supporting many other beings to do the same, I've become enthralled by the deep and mysterious magic that's activated when we choose to say yes to ourselves and commit to the book writing journey. Of course, we want to inspire change and new perspectives in our readers, but the transformation that happens as an author, both throughout the writing process and by actually releasing your book into the world, is surprisingly potent. I know I've been blindsided in the most disruptive and delicious ways by some of the changes my books have brought into my life. Writing a book is like casting a spell. Although we can never be completely sure what's going to be unleashed during the process, we choose to do it anyway. This Unbound one is a heroic journey. Each book has the potential to be a magical portal, a doorway to a new world, both for you and your reader. Each book has a very specific medicine that it's here to share with us. And each book gives us the opportunity to alchemize the magnificent imperfection of our experience into gold. The truth is that anyone can write a book. We could all get a few thousand words down and put them together. But what fascinates me is what happens when we allow the book writing process to go deeper. When we say, fuck it, get naked and dive way down beneath the surface. Letting go of the shoulds and any need to be acceptable, sensible, or approved of. What fascinates me is what happens when we make ourselves fully available to being transformed by the very act of writing a book. This is Unbound Writing, and this is the process we'll be exploring together here in the Unbound Writers Club. I'm Nicola, author and founder of the Unbound Press, and I help magical beings to write the transformational book they're really here to write at this time. I'm your guide here in the Unbound Writers Club, and the aim of this podcast is to help you to feel supported, encouraged, activated as you embark on your book writing journey. Whether you're a first-time author or have many books out in the world, my hope is that you will find something here to inspire you. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Unbound Writers Club. Today I'm kind of jigging up and down excitedly because I have a very special guest. All the guests in the Unbound Writers Club are special, but I am especially excited today because I am joined by Ceryn Rowntree. So Ceryn is one of our authors at the Unbound Press. Her book, The Divine Feminist, came out a couple of years ago. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, you need to go and check it out. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about the power of our stories. And Ceryn is about to run a new course called Rekindling Your Story, which is all about reclaiming our stories, celebrating our stories, really acknowledging that our stories, whether they feel big or small, have so much potency and magic and help us to remember who we truly are. So I am not going to say too much more because I really want to dive into this conversation. And when you're listening to Ceryn and after you've listened to Ceryn, if you feel called to join this course, it is starting very soon. We're going to pop the details in the show notes for you. I really hope that if you're feeling called, you decide to be part of it. But let's dive into the conversation. So, Ceryn, welcome back to the Unbound Writers Club.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love being here. I always love these conversations. So thank you.
Oh, I love you being here. And whenever we get together, like we've already talked about all the things before we hit record, so much being sparked off. And yeah, really excited about what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, I am going to start with traditional question that I always ask at the beginning of these conversations. And I'm curious to know what it means to you right now in this moment to be an unbound writer.
Oh, when you asked that question that time, and you've asked me that question a number of times, and when you asked it that time, I actually felt a massive wave of emotion coming up for me because I feel like I've spent the last probably about 15, 16 months of my life really unbinding in a different way than I had before. And if I get to the core of the how I've been unbinding is there's lots of it, but if I get to the core of the why, it's so that I can write. Because what I've realized is that every piece of writing I've ever done up until this point has been hampered by my good girl sitting there going, no, make sure that sentence structure is right, has been hampered by, but where is this going to go? How is it going to be published? How is it? And now all of a sudden I've unbound myself to the point of writing for fun, writing for the joy of it, writing for the beauty of it, and writing for the little girl who used to, I had a sudden memory the other week of how when I was a kid, anytime I used to go on holiday, I would get in the back of a car or on a plane or whatever I was doing with about 4 notebooks and a stack of pens. And I would just write for hours and hours and hours. And so to me, almost that's what unbound writing means now. It means going back to that little girl who would grab a stack of notebooks and a stack of pens and just write because it felt like it ignited something in her, and it felt like it was the blood flowing through our veins almost. Sounds dead dramatic. And that's what unbound writing is for me, just letting myself do it.
I felt that emotion too. In that pause between asking the question and you starting to answer. Yeah, I really feel that. And I guess, everything you've just shared there's something about writing. It can be part of who we are, like for that little girl, and same for my little girl, little Nicola. It was just something she didn't think about, oh, is it okay for me to do this? Or am I doing it right? It was just like part of who she was, part of her identity. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I've been talking to another friend recently who was also an author. And we were talking about the fact that when I'm not sure if I was 14 or 15, I sent a manuscript off to a publisher. And that is the last time, up until about 2 months ago, I completed a novel. And my dream has always been to be a novelist. And I didn't have any sort of thought of, well, how is this structured? Oh my goodness, how is it written? I just wrote it, then picked up my favorite book next to me and was like, these people are the publishers, let's send it to them. Now, of course, now as an adult, I have all of that, like, well, it has to go through an agent or, whatever. At that point in time, that was just what I did. And how beautiful. And actually, I don't know where it is, but I wish I still knew where the letter was that came back. Because while it was a rejection, it actually wasn't this is rubbish. Please go and do something else with your time. It was your writing is beautiful, but it's not the right thing for us to publish right now. And oh my God, like that's unbound writing, isn't it? The courage that we had as young women and as children to just write because it was who we were.
Yeah.
We are.
Well, exactly. This is a huge process of remembering, isn't it? Remembering who we are. And as you were talking about that as well, I'm like, oh, if we could only let it be that simple now, like whatever we wanted to do, whatever we wanted to create, if we could just go, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, okay, I'm going to send it off to this publisher because they published one of my favorite. I just didn't have all of this stuff around it. Oh, it just feels so freeing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And now someone's just put something through the door, so I apologize if you hear a noisy dog in the background. But yeah, exactly that. Like the freedom of it, the liberation of it, it is the unbinding, isn't it? Like the world does such a good job of binding our writing and of binding us. And so actually being unbound, it's not about learning anything different. It's
no,
exactly as you just spoke about. It's come back to that.
Exactly. Which leads us nicely into Rekindling Your Story, which feels like, that is the journey that you are taking, or the invitation that you are extending to take women on this journey to really remember who they are and the potency of that through their stories. So do you want to speak a little bit more into that and what Rekindling Your Story is?
Yeah, thank you. So this all started a couple of years ago when I started. Obviously, I published The Divine Feminist through Unbound Press. And from that came this real love of marrying together feminism and goddess mythology. And, they're things that I'm really passionate about, the things I love. And so I started running these stories that were called Rekindling Her Story sessions. And in each one, we would tune into a particular goddess, a particular figure from mythology. And we'd sort of go through the story as we know it today And then I'd say, right, now let's shine a new light on it. Let's actually say, if we look at this now as feminists, if we look at this now as wise women, if we look at this now as witches, what does it tell us instead? If we give a divine feminine and a divine feminist lens to this story, what do we see instead? And quite quickly, what we saw was that these women who had been cast as villains, they had been forgotten, they had been cast as monsters, they had been all of these things, they were nothing of the sort. You know, Medusa is such a prime example of this. Medusa is that she's the original monster. She has those snakes in her head. She turns men to stone. Actually, when you dive into her story and read about the fact that she was a survivor of rape, that the goddess Athena gave her those gifts almost as a protective mechanism so that men wouldn't attack her anymore. She lived on this island with her sisters where they were in this kind of feminine community. Imagine how terrified patriarchy must have been of that, of women who lived together. You know, when you look into the fact that in those days, goddess priestesses would wear masks to do their ritual that had snakes coming off the top like hair. So was she actually a snake-headed monster, or was she a priestess? It's a fascinating thing. And so I started looking at these goddess stories and I just loved it. And what I realized is over the course of the last 18 or so months that I've been running these workshops, it's really made me look again at my story. So, you know, I'm a trained counselor. I've just completed a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. And so I look a lot at the psychological side of this as well and how this affects us. And I realized that how many times I myself have been in that position that Lilith was in when she was locked in the Garden of Eden, and everybody was saying, well, but this is paradise. Why would you want to escape? This is paradise. And she was like, yeah, but I'm trapped. I can't be me. I can't do my own thing. And so she spread her wings and flew away, and then had a lot of people tell her that she was evil as a result. And we still call her evil. And so this is a very long-winded way of getting to the point of saying this is where the Rekindling Your Story course started for me. Was actually, what if we all did that? What if we combined, there is a brilliant psychological theory that I love called the heroine's journey by Maureen Murdoch. And it's the journey that we women are supposed to take to come to the place of being what she calls spiritual warriors. Or as I like to see it, kind of in that place of our power and our wholeness and our wisdom. And actually, I looked at this and was like, what if we used this as a framework and said, we're going to bring together those goddess stories. We're going to bring together what we know as being women in this world at this time about changing our perspective on the world. And we're going to bring together that pathway that Maureen Murdoch has laid out for us of what it is to venture into our psyche, to dive into our own underworld and our own shadows, and then to come out the other side and remember who the hell we are. And we're going to combine those things and take a journey together that shines a light on your story and helps you to rekindle the real fire of that power and wisdom that's within it. So it's 10 weeks of doing exactly that. And I'm so excited.
I mean, I like, can we just start now? And not just do that for 10 weeks, but, you know.
But it's interesting you say that, because I started writing a webpage about it. We were talking about this before we logged on. I started writing a webpage and was like, what am I going to write about this course? It is possibly the longest webpage I have ever written. And I thought at the start of it, you know, I practice as a medium. And so I thought at the start of it, there will be a goddess energy that we work with every single week throughout this. That feels really important to me. She'll be kind of a talisman. She'll be a space holder. She'll be like the totem for us for that work. And every time I got to a new section of it and I was working out what's going to go in it, there would be 2 or 3 would come forward and be like, me, please, me. Can I do this one? Hold on, just back off, ladies. Just calm down. I have this vision, Nicola, that at the moment it's 10 weeks. I have this vision in about 3 years' time, I'll be running this course again and be like, so we've got this year-long course that's all about rekindling your story.
Well, 100%, like totally. There's something that comes through, you know, even saying about the webpage, and I've read the webpage, like there was nothing that came up for me around, oh, that's long, or, you know, but there's this too much piece that was coming through as you were speaking. And I feel like, you know, I'm sure this will come through like in the work that you're doing in Rekindling Your Story. But so often we can be like, oh, yeah, can I really take up that much space? And even like the goddesses coming forward, like you think there's going to be one, there's like a whole crew of them for each section.
The whole bang. But isn't that interesting? And I think that's a really, really valid point. And it's a really useful reflection for me. So thank you, because that's something that I'm not very good. I'm still not very good at this time. is that allowing myself to take up space. I'm getting better every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important point actually about this course, that I'm not here saying I've got all the answers. I'm also not here saying, here's a model and it will fix you and make everything better. That's not what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, this is your story. This is your power. This is your wisdom. I can give you the framework. I can hold the space, and I will. And I am so excited about doing it. And you know what? I'm only one step further ahead. I just happen to have looked at the model a little bit beforehand, and I'm not teaching this as somebody who has been there and done it all. I'm teaching this as somebody who is in it and is guiding rather than fully leading. I'm in it as well, and I'm really excited about that.
Well, I'm in it when it comes to the too much piece as well. That's why I'm able to clock it because, it's so present for me. And yeah, I love that. I feel like this is such an important part of what we're doing at the Unbound Press, actually. We're not writing from a place of, well, I am an expert on this subject and I will impart my knowledge to you from some lofty place. It's like, I'm going on this journey. I might be a step or two ahead of you, but yeah, do you want to come with me? And it feels like that with Rekindling Your Story.
It does. I had a realization over the weekend that I don't know why I've never come to this before, because it's quite obvious, but I was thinking about the idea of patriarchy and how we always think that the opposite to patriarchy is matriarchy. And it's not, because that's still hierarchical. And I was thinking about how beautiful it is that actually the opposite to patriarchy is really sisterhood. And it is really us all holding hands and walking alongside one another, rather than any of us seeing one another as higher or lower.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of not just the Unbound Press, not just Rekindling Your Story, but of everything that we are both, and so many of the people listening to this, and so many people in the world right now, so passionate about, is we're telling our stories, we're sharing our insights, not from a place of preaching, but from a place of, we're all in it together. We're all sitting on the picnic blankets talking to one another about it.
Gorgeous. Oh, I love that image as well. Maybe there needs to be like a storytelling picnic at the end of Rekindling Your Story. Totally here for it.
Oh, it's in my brain. It's in my brain.
As you were speaking there, actually, what came through for me is we can have this kind of like hierarchy of stories as well, like judging our stories to others. And this is something you talk about on the invitation page for Rekindling Your Story. It's like, I think it's one of the points at the end where it's like, well, I'm not really sure if my story is interesting enough, which can come up a lot. We feel like we've got to have this amazing like rags to riches or like rock bottom moment like story before we can like share it and tell it. So yeah, is that something is coming up a lot?
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting, last year I went to see Caitlin Moran speak, and she's talking about her latest book was all about men. And it was all about sort of, how men are brought up and the problems that we have, that men are experiencing at the moment and all that stuff. And she was talking about how in her research, she'd learned that men didn't think their stories were valid and their experiences were valid of support unless they were big. And when she delved into that further, she realized that actually the books that boys were encouraged to read, they're like superhero novels. They're stories of superhero comic books. They're stories about boys saving the world. Evil people come in, massive danger, boys saving the world. Oh, well, okay. So if me as a boy, my story is not about somebody saving the world and me being in grave danger, it's not a story worth telling. It's different for girls, because look at when we're growing up, she was talking about, I remember vividly reading and rereading Little Women. And it's like, Joe lost a glove. Joe lost a glove. Oh, this is terrible. And I remember it really struck me and made me laugh, because I was thinking, it's so true. Like, I remember being a kid. I loved Little Women when I was a kid and being like, the glove. Oh my God, the glove. And there's an extra bit to that, because while that is frivolous and it's not really of any consequence, nonetheless, at the end of that series of books, sorry, spoilers if anybody hasn't read.
Spoiler alert. I'll have to say that in the introduction now, Karen. If you haven't read Little Women.
If you haven't read the entirety of the Little Women series and watched many films about it, Beth dies. There's still death, as there is in all of our lives. There's still every one of the other sisters at the end of the books ends up married. There's still some great love who comes in, there is still these massive things. And it's not. We all have loves, we all have griefs, we all have that. Just because they're not on the grand scale of Iron Man sacrificing himself to save the world, it doesn't mean it's not a story worth telling.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to what you said about taking up too much space. We are so often told that our stories shouldn't take up space. And it's just not true, because there's still that great level of grief and of love, of beauty and of pain, of joy and of sadness, like whatever we feel, in the same way that, I'm trying to think of the analogy here. Like if you may have broken your leg and someone else may have just broken a toe, there's still a broken bone there. It's still there. That was a terrible analogy. But we forget this, this isn't about comparison.
Yeah.
And those stories can leave such a mark within us and within our lives, no matter how big or small they may be to somebody else. It doesn't matter. They're still our stories, and they're still big ones.
Yeah, it's interesting, that comparison piece. I mean, there's a couple of things that come through there as you're speaking. One is like there's something around like tempo and rhythm, and like we need the little details as well as the big kind of, we need the lost glove. As well as like, the amazing love story or death or disaster or whatever, we need it all because that's life. And also I feel like the comparison piece has been heightened because of social media and the way we see others portraying themselves, or we portray ourselves on social, or feel we've got to portray ourselves on social media. There's this kind of perfectionism element that can creep in, and it can like sanitize our story, can't it? Because it's like, okay, I'm only going to show the shiny bits.
And it's another gatekeeper, right? I was thinking about this a lot when I started coming up with the plan for the course, was that if we go back, way, way, way back, hundreds of years ago, when our foremothers would have sat around fires, or they would have sat in sewing circles or whatever, and told their stories, those stories would have been told as teaching moments, or they would have been told as kind of precautionary tales, or to introduce one another, to the group, or whatever it is. Our stories were the ways we communicated with each other. Our stories were how we learned about the world. And then written language came in, and we started to commit them to writing. But then the patriarchal education system came in, and that ability to commit our stories to writing was absolutely honed down to only a very select few. Upper class, white men. They were the only ones who were allowed to learn how to read and write. They were the only ones who had access to being able to write down their stories. And since their stories were the only ones that survived, we started to think that their stories were the only ones that were valid of being recorded. And by the way, let's also not forget the fact that there were an awful lot of stories that weren't safe to write down at that time. Feminine magic, we could not write it down because we would be burned at the stake. LGBTQIA plus stories, they could not be written down because these people would be killed. Like these stories, we could not, either we didn't have the capacity to write them down, or it wasn't safe for us to write them down. And so our stories, the lost glove, the person that we fell in love with and learned the hard way that actually that's a massive red flag. The time that, we did something and we learned just how incredible, I don't know, the sunrise looks over the mountains or whatever. The smaller stories that we just didn't have the capacity or the ability to write down, they started to be lost to time. And so we started to see them as invalid. Now, fast forward to now, it's much easier for us all to share our stories. We have social media, we have blogs, we have incredible organizations like Unbound Press, which allow us to share our stories in a much more equitable way than has been done. And yet, then when you add social media into that, you get a totally different gatekeeper. That you can't share your stories unless you look a certain way, unless you have the right filter, unless you're using the right hashtags. And actually those stories aren't valid unless you get X number of likes and X number of follows. And it's just another gatekeeper that is holding us back and telling us that we and consequently our stories aren't enough. It's bullshit.
It really is, isn't it? I got this like image coming to mind as you're speaking, Ceryn, of like the more we like acknowledge and tell and reclaim our own stories, like all the different elements of our, the small, the big, like in between, whatever it is, it's almost like a painting by numbers where we get to feel more of ourselves in, yeah, we get to remember more of who we are. And yeah, we can forget that so easily. Like, in a story, you remember something all of a sudden about your experience, and it had been forgotten for so long. You remember that kind of part of who you are, and it's like, wow, I did that, or I experienced that. And it could be something small, but you just see the magic in that, and it just kind of fills in more of who you are.
Completely. And we're so good. I think one of the posts I've done on social media in the last couple of days about this is the fact that we're so good at taking the narrator of our story and allowing whoever has defined it for us to be that narrator forevermore. And actually, I think when we can reclaim that role of narrator for ourselves, we get to see those different details. We get to see it from a different perspective. And so often it's not to say that other people can't also have their say, because sometimes they see things that we don't. Look, before when you mentioned the taking up too much space thing, it's a prime example. But if we can reclaim that role as narrator of our story, as kind of almost guardian and keeper of our story, we suddenly get to see all the bits play out in front of us. And when we get to see all the bits play out in front of us, we can choose which of those to rekindle. We can choose which of those to put into that alchemical fire of our lives and actually allow it to really take shape. And I think there's a real power in that.
Absolutely. I can just feel it as we're speaking. So, who do you imagine Rekindling Your Story is for? If someone's listening to this, I mean, I guess basically, if it's sparking something off for you and you're listening, then you need to check out the
100%.
super long invitation page. No.
Get yourself a cup of tea, put aside about an hour and a half. No, it's not that long.
That's not.
Put aside some time and check out the page. But no, I mean, I agree with you. If it's sparking something in with you, check it out. In you, check it out.
Yeah.
See where you go. I think for me, this is, and it could be multifold, right? I think there's an element for the people who are likely to be part of the Unbound writers community. If you're sitting there with your own story that you want to write or that you want to share, and it keeps getting stuck, it's like it gets stuck somewhere in your throat, it gets stuck somewhere at the ends of your fingers, this might be a good one for you, because it might just unstem that and help you see it from a different perspective. And I also think, even if you're somebody who's never thought about writing your story, in which case, welcome, because I'm not sure how you found your way to this podcast, but well,
I'm glad you're here.
If you have never thought about writing your story because you thought it was too small, oh God, I would love to share my story. But what is there for me to say? Who am I to say that? I can't, because I'm so ashamed of X, Y, and Z that I couldn't possibly have that coming out into public knowledge. All of those I can't are exactly the pathway that brings you to the need to rekindle your story.
Yes. And it's not, you don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be a writer to do this course. It's not about the writing. It's about the story and the power of that.
I think when I first came to you and mentioned that I was doing this in a very excitable voice note a few weeks ago, my line to you was, this isn't a course about writing a story. This is a course about stories as the narratives that guide our lives, rather than stories of something we put on our page. It's not a course about writing a story. And if I do this right, and this is on me, we will have an awful lot of people who get to the end of this course and go, but I can write my story if I want to. Who will remember what it is to be their unbound versions of themselves, and hopefully want to take that into, be it writing their story, be it speaking their story, but just sharing and owning their story.
Yeah, and celebrating our stories, isn't it? Like, if this, well, I have no doubt that this course will result in more women celebrating their stories. So totally here for that. So yeah, where do they find this invitation page, Ceryn?
My website is cerynrowntree.com, and you'll see there is a link on the front page of the website to get there. The link, I'm sure, will be in the show notes as well, because obviously my name is not a one that's necessarily easy to know how to spell without reading it. So yeah, head over there. Also, I am talking about it quite frequently on Instagram, and I'm about to start talking about it on TikTok as well, which makes me think I'm probably not down with the kids enough for that, but I'm going to give it a go.
I love it.
I'm talking about it on social media, so check that out. And yeah, if it would be an absolute honor to hold space for that journey. If you're listening and it's stirring something within you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh, I am so excited to see what comes out of this. And I feel like we have to have another conversation after you've run the course for the first time to talk about some of the things that have, some of the themes and some of the things that you've noticed coming out of it. Thank you so much for creating this, Ceryn, and doing this work. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating the space where I get unbind, which has led to this and is continuing to lead to this. And thank you for receiving this course with such open arms, because you really have, and that means an awful lot. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I feel like I just need to get up and dance a bit after our conversation. So I might go and do that. Oh, yeah, we will. We'll put all the details in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining today, Ceryn, and having this conversation. Always a joy, and I'm sure you'll be back here quite soon as well.
Would love to be. Thank you so much, Nicola. Thank you.
What do you do when you want to write a book, but the usual approaches are leaving you feeling restricted, pressurized, not at all enough, and pretty dry, to be honest? You find another way, of course. And if you are listening to this, my free unconventional book writing guide is going to be perfect for you. It's designed especially for soul-led coaches, healers, and mentors who want to write a transformational book without spending hours on end chained to a desk. In it, I'm giving you my unique spin on the top 10 questions I hear from would-be authors, and it's going to help you liberate the way you write forever. Download your free copy of the guide now over at nicolahumber.com/10, the number 10, 10 hyphen questions.